I have lived in Evershade all my life. It is not the kind of town that appears on maps unless you look very closely, and even then, the name is printed so faintly it seems ashamed of itself. A handful of streets, a church with peeling white paint, a diner that smells of burnt coffee, and the lake. Always the lake. People call it forbidden. They don't say it with drama, not like in the stories you hear around campfires. They say it with a shrug, a mutter, a quick glance away. It's a word that has settled into the bones of the town, passed down like a family recipe no one dares to change. Children are warned not to play near it. Teenagers dare each other to touch its water, though most don't. Adults pretend it isn't there, as if ignoring it will make it vanish. But I could never ignore it. From the time I was a little girl, I felt the pull of the lake. I would sneak away from my mother's watchful eyes and wander down the narrow path through the pines, my shoes crunching on the gravel, my heart racing with a mixture of fear and excitement. The air always changed as I drew closer, cooler, heavier, tinged with the scent of algae and damp earth. And then suddenly the trees would part, and there it was, a sheet of water so still it seemed unnatural, reflecting the sky in colors that didn't quite belong. I remember once, when I was 10, I thought I saw the water ripple, even though there was no wind. The surface shimmered, and for a moment I thought I saw a face looking back at me. Not my own reflection, but someone else's. I ran home crying, and when I told my mother, she slapped me hard across the cheek and hissed, "Don't you ever speak of that place again." That was the first time I realized the lake was more than just water. It was a secret the whole town carried, and I was the only one foolish enough to look it in the eye. By 2003, I was 27 years old, working at the Evershade Public Library. My life was quiet, predictable. I shelved books, stamped due dates, and listened to the whispers of old women who came in more for gossip than for reading. But every evening, when my shift ended, I walked the same path I had walked as a child, down to the lake. That spring, the air was restless. Storms rolled in more often than usual, leaving the ground slick with mud and the trees dripping with rain. The lake seemed to swell with it, darker and deeper than I remembered. It was on one of those evenings that I found the first impossible thing. I had been walking along the shore, my boots sinking into the damp earth, when something metallic caught the last light of the setting sun. At first, I thought it was just a piece of trash, a soda can, maybe, or a bit of scrap metal washed up from the dam. But when I bent down and brushed away the mud, I realized it was a cell phone. Not like any I had ever seen. Sleek, silver, impossibly thin. The buttons were arranged differently, the screen larger than the clunky Nokias and Motorola's people carried in town. I turned it over in my hands, confused. The strangest part was that it wasn't broken. When I pressed a button, the screen lit up with a soft blue glow, and there in the corner was the date, August 14th, 2007. I stared at it for a long time, my breath caught in my throat. It was 2003. For years too early. I told myself it had to be a mistake, a glitch, some kind of prototype phone someone had dropped. But deep down, I knew better. The lake had given it to me. I carried the phone home that night, hiding it in my bag like contraband. I didn't tell anyone. Not my mother, not my coworkers, not even the few friends I still had in town. I knew what they would say, that I was imagining things, that I was chasing shadows, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, the phone resting on my nightstand. Every so often, I would press the button just to see the date again. 2007, it felt like a message, though I couldn't yet understand what it meant. The next morning, I returned to the lake. I told myself it was just curiosity, but it was more than that. It was compulsion. The water was calm, unnaturally so, as if it were waiting for me. I walked the shoreline slowly, scanning the mud, the reeds, the driftwood, and then I found something else. A photograph half buried in the silt. I pulled it free, wiping the dirt away with trembling fingers. It showed a family of 4, a man, a woman, 2 children, standing in front of a house I didn't recognize. Their clothes looked modern, but not quite right, as if they belonged to a time just out of reach. On the back, written in neat blue ink, was a date, June 2006. That was when I began to feel it, the eyes of Evershade on me. At the diner, conversations would falter when I walked in. At the library, patrons avoided my gaze. Even the pastor at church seemed to look through me, as if I were already half gone. I wanted to ask them what they knew, why they all pretended the lake was nothing more than water. But I didn't. Something in their silence told me that if I pushed too hard, I would find myself on the wrong side of whatever pact held this town together. So I kept my secrets. The phone, the photograph, the dates that didn't belong. But the lake wasn't finished with me. One night, as I stood at the shore, the wind died suddenly. The trees stilled, the air thickened, and the water rippled without cause. I leaned closer, my heart pounding. And then I heard it, a voice, not from the trees, not from the wind, but from the water itself. It whispered my name. The morning after I found the photograph, I tried to tell my mother. I don't know why I thought she would listen. Maybe because she had lived in Evershade longer than anyone. Maybe because she carried the same silence in her eyes that the rest of the town did. I laid the picture on the kitchen table, the edges still damp from the lake. "Look," I said. "Do you know them?" She didn't even glance down. She just kept stirring her coffee, the spoon clinking against the mug. "You shouldn't bring things from there into this house," she said flatly. "But the date," I began. Her hand slammed the spoon down so hard the mug cracked. Coffee bled across the table. She looked at me then, her face pale, her lips trembling with something between fear and fury. "Claire," she whispered, "don't you ever speak of that place again." It was the same words she had used when I was a child, the same tone. And just like then, I felt the sting of shame, though I hadn't done anything wrong. At the library, I tried again. I showed the photograph to Mrs. Keating, one of the regulars who came in every Tuesday to check out romance novels. She squinted at it, then pushed it back across the counter. "Strangers," she said. "Not from here." "But look at the date." Her eyes hardened. "Not from here," she repeated and walked away. By the end of the week, I stopped showing it to anyone. The photograph went into the same drawer as the phone, hidden beneath old receipts and unpaid bills. But hiding it didn't make it go away. Every night I dreamed of the lake. The dreams were always the same. I stood at the shore, the water black and still. Then it would ripple, though there was no wind, and faces would rise to the surface. Not reflections, not mine. Strangers, some smiling, some weeping, some with mouths open in silent screams. I would wake with my sheets damp, my skin clammy, the smell of algae clinging to me. One evening, after closing the library, I walked to the lake again. The path was muddy from rain, the pines dripping with water. The air was heavy, pressing against my lungs. I told myself I was only going to look, to prove to myself that nothing was there. But as soon as I reached the shore, I saw it, another object half buried in the mud. This time it was a newspaper clipping. The paper was soggy, the ink smudged, but I could still make out the headline. "Local boy missing. Search continues." The date was tomorrow. I dropped it as if it had burned me. My heart hammered in my chest. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The lake was too quiet, too still. And then the wind died. The trees froze, their branches motionless. The air thickened, heavy as stone. The surface of the lake rippled once, twice, though nothing touched it. I leaned forward, breath shallow. That was when I heard it. A voice. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even clear. It was a whisper, soft as breath against my ear. But it came from the water, and it spoke my name. I stumbled back, nearly falling into the mud. My pulse roared in my ears. "Who's there?" I shouted, though I knew no one was. The lake didn't answer. The ripples faded. The trees swayed again, as if nothing had happened. But I knew what I had heard. It had said, "Claire." The next day, I tried to convince myself it was a trick of the wind or my imagination, or the stress of too many sleepless nights. But deep down, I knew better. The lake wasn't just showing me things. It was speaking to me. And worse, it knew my name. That week, the town's silence grew heavier. At the diner, conversations stopped when I walked in. At church, people avoided my eyes. Even at the library, patrons whispered behind my back. I felt marked, as if the lake had branded me. One evening, as I walked home, I passed two men on the sidewalk. They lowered their voices, but I caught a fragment of their words. "She's been chosen." When I turned, they were already gone. That night, I didn't go to the lake. I told myself I wouldn't. I locked the doors, closed the curtains, tried to read, but the pull was too strong. By midnight, I was walking the path again, flashlight in hand, heart pounding. The water was waiting. I stood at the shore, the beam of my flashlight trembling across the surface. For a long time, nothing happened. Just silence, just stillness. Then, faintly, the ripples began. And once more, the whisper rose from the water. Claire. I don't know how long I stood there, rooted to the spot, listening to the sound of my own name carried on the breath of the lake. Long enough to know that whatever secret Evershade was hiding, I was now part of it, and there would be no turning back. I first saw him again at the gas station on Main Street, the one with the flickering neon sign that never seemed to be repaired. It was late evening, the kind of dusky hour when Evershade feels more like a shadow than a town. I was filling my car, lost in thought, when I noticed a man leaning against the wall, smoking. At first, I didn't recognize him. His hair was darker, his face sharper, lined with years I hadn't witnessed. But when he looked up, something in his eyes struck me with a jolt of memory. Allan Chunt, I whispered before I could stop myself. He smiled faintly, as if the name tasted strange on his tongue. Claire Whitmore, still here. It wasn't a question. It was a statement heavy with meaning. Allan had left Evershade years ago, suddenly and without explanation. People said he'd gone to the city, that he'd found work, that he'd wanted to escape the suffocating silence of this place. No one ever knew for sure. And now here he was back again, as if the town had called him home. We spoke cautiously at first, exchanging the kind of polite words strangers use, though we were not strangers. He asked if I still walked by the lake. My heart skipped. Yes, I said. He didn't laugh. He didn't warn me away. He only nodded, his expression unreadable. Then you've seen it too. That night, I couldn't sleep. His words echoed in my mind. You've seen it too. What did he mean? What had he seen? The next day, I found him at the diner. He was sitting alone in a booth, a cup of coffee untouched before him. I slid into the seat across from him without asking. You know something, I said. He looked at me for a long time, then leaned forward. The lake doesn't just show things. It chooses people. It chose me once, and now it's chosen you. I felt a chill run through me. Why me? Because you listen, he said simply. Most people spend their lives pretending it isn't there. But you've always been drawn to it, just like I was. Our meetings became frequent after that. At first, we spoke in public places, the diner, the library, the grocery store. But soon, we began to meet in secret. He rented a small cabin at the edge of town near the woods, and I found myself walking there at night, my footsteps quick, my heart racing. Inside, the air smelled of cedar and smoke. We would sit close, our voices low, speaking of the things no one else dared to mention. He told me about the night he left Evershade, how he had seen something in the water that terrified him so deeply he couldn't stay. He never said exactly what it was, only that it had followed him in his dreams for years. And then one night, our words gave way to silence. It wasn't planned. It wasn't gentle. It was urgent, desperate, as if we were both clinging to each other to keep from drowning. His hands were rough, his breath hot against my skin, and I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years. It wasn't love, not yet. It was something rawer, a collision of loneliness and desire, a secret pact sealed in the dark. But in his arms I felt less alone. For the first time since the lake had whispered my name, I felt that someone else understood. Afterward, lying against him, I asked, "Why did you come back?" He was silent for a long time. Then he said, "Because the lake called me, and because I knew it would call you too." From then on, Allan became both my refuge and my torment. When we were together, I felt strong, defiant, ready to face whatever the lake demanded. But when we were apart, doubts gnawed at me. Was he truly on my side, or was he part of the lake's design? Sometimes, in the middle of the night, I would wake to find him watching me, his eyes dark, unreadable, and I would wonder if he was protecting me, or waiting for the moment the water claimed me. Yet I couldn't stay away. The town's silence pressed harder against me. People whispered when I passed, their eyes sharp with suspicion. My mother barely spoke to me anymore. At the library, patrons avoided my desk. I was becoming an outcast, marked by the lake. But with Allan, I wasn't alone. We shared the weight of it, the fear, the fascination. And in the heat of our secret encounters, I almost believed we could defy it together. Almost. One evening, as we stood at the shore side by side, the water rippled though the air was still. I felt his hand brush mine, steady and grounding. "Do you hear it?" I whispered. He nodded. "I always hear it." And in that moment, I realized the truth. Whatever bound me to the lake, it bound him too. Allan's cabin smelled of cedar and smoke, the kind of scent that clings to it long after the fire has gone out. I had been there before, but that night felt different. He seemed restless, pacing the floor, his hands twitching as though he carried something too heavy to hold inside. Finally, he stopped and opened a drawer in the small desk by the window. From it, he pulled a leather-bound book, its cover cracked and darkened with age. He set it on the table between us with a kind of reverence, as though it were both sacred and dangerous. "This," he said quietly, "is what I never showed anyone. Not when I left. Not when I came back. Only you." I reached out, my fingers brushing the cover. The leather was cool, almost damp, as if it had been left too close to the water. "What is it?" I asked. "A record," he said. "Not of people. Of the lake." I opened the book. The first page was filled with neat handwriting, dated decades ago. Notes, sketches, fragments of sentences. June 12, 1968. Found a wristwatch still ticking. Date set to 1972. August 3rd, 1975. Heard a child's laughter at the shore. No children present. October 19th, 1981. Photograph of a wedding. Bride unknown. Date 1984. I turned the pages slowly, my breath catching with each entry. The book was a catalogue of impossibilities, stretching back through the years. Objects, sounds, visions, all tied to the lake. Some pages contained drawings, a shoe half buried in mud, a newspaper headline, a face glimpsed in the water. Others were filled with words, hurried and uneven, as if written in fear. "It knows my name. The water is not water. It waits." All of this, Allan said, his voice low, was gathered by those who came before us. People who saw what we've seen. They wrote it down, passed it on. When I left Evershade, I thought I could escape it. But the ledger found its way back to me. And now it's yours too. I looked up at him. "Why me?" "Because the lake chose you," he said simply, "just as it chose them." I turned to the later pages. Some bore Allan's handwriting, rougher than the earlier entries. September 1995. Dreamed of the lake. Woke with mud on my hands. March 1997. Heard my name whispered. Left town the next day. April 2003. Returned. The voice is louder now. My chest tightened. "You've been writing in it." He nodded. "And so will you." At the back of the book was a blank page, or almost blank. A faint stain spread across the paper. A dark ring like water had seeped into it. I touched it, and the page felt damp, though the rest of the book was dry. "That page," Allan said, watching me, "is waiting for you." I pulled my hand back, as if burned. "I don't want it." "It doesn't matter what you want," he said. "The lake doesn't ask. It takes." That night I dreamed again. I was sitting at the desk in Allan's cabin, the ledger open before me. My hand moved across the page, writing words I didn't understand. The ink bled into the paper, spreading like veins. When I woke, my hand smelled of algae and silt. The next evening, I returned to the cabin. Allan was waiting, the ledger open on the table. "I don't want to be part of this," I said. "You already are," he replied. "The moment you heard it speak your name, you belong to it." I shook my head, but deep down I knew he was right. The lake had marked me. The ledger was only proof. I spent hours reading through the entries, tracing the words of those who had come before. Some were calm, almost clinical, as if the writers had tried to study the phenomenon like scientists. Others were frantic, desperate, filled with fear. One entry stopped me cold. July 1989. She stood at the shore. The water whispered her name. She smiled. There was no explanation, no follow-up. Just that. I closed the book, my hands trembling. "What does it want from us?" I asked. Allan's eyes were dark, unreadable. To be remembered. To be witnessed. To be obeyed. Later, as I walked home through the silent streets of Evershade, I felt the weight of the ledger pressing against me, even though I had left it behind. The words clung to me, the voices of the past echoing in my mind. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me, that one day soon I would add my own words to its pages. The storm came without warning. One moment the air was heavy and still. The next it was alive with thunder. The The sky split open, rain falling in sheets, so thick I could barely see the streetlights outside my window. Evershade had always been a quiet town, but that night it felt like the world itself was breaking apart. I should have stayed inside. I should have locked the doors, pulled the blankets over my head, and waited for the storm to pass. But the lake was calling me. I felt it in my chest, in the marrow of my bones. Every crack of thunder was like a summons, every flash of lightning a signal. By midnight, I was walking the path through the woods, soaked to the skin, my flashlight useless in the downpour. The trees bent under the wind, their branches clawing at the sky. The ground was slick with mud, sucking at my boots. Still, I pressed on. When I reached the clearing, the sight stopped me cold. The lake was glowing, not from the lightning above, but from within. A pale, shifting light pulsed beneath the surface, spreading outward in ripples that shimmered like veins of fire. The rain struck the water in 1,000 tiny explosions, but the glow never dimmed. It was alive, breathing, waiting. I stepped closer, my heart hammering. The storm seemed to fade, the thunder distant, the rain muffled. All I could hear was the water, whispering, humming, vibrating with a sound too low to be human. Shapes moved beneath the surface. At first, I thought they were tricks of the light, distortions caused by the storm, but then I saw them clearly, faces. Dozens of them, rising and falling with the ripples. Some were strangers, their features blurred and unfamiliar. Others, I recognized Mrs. Keating from the library, the boy who worked at the diner, even my father who had died when I was a child. And then I saw myself, my own face, pale and wide-eyed, staring back at me from beneath the water. I stumbled backward, my breath catching in my throat. The reflection didn't move as I did. It stayed, watching, lips parting as if to speak. The whisper rose again, louder now, layered with voices. My name, over and over, spoken in tones that were both tender and cruel. Claire, Claire, Claire. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen. The storm raged around me, but I felt nothing, only the pull of the water, the certainty that if I stepped forward, if I let myself fall, the lake would take me in. And part of me wanted it. The thought terrified me, but it was true. There was a strange comfort in the idea of surrender, of letting the water close over my head, of becoming part of whatever lived beneath. But another part of me resisted. I thought of Allan, of the ledger, of the blank page waiting for my words. I thought of my mother, her silence, her fear. I thought of the town complicit in its denial. The lake wanted me, but it wasn't death it offered. It was something worse. At dawn, Allan found me. I was still standing at the shore, drenched, shivering, my clothes stiff with dried mud. He grabbed my shoulders, shaking me. Claire, what were you doing out here? I couldn't answer. My voice was gone, stolen by the storm. He pulled me into his arms, his warmth shocking against my frozen skin. You can't keep coming here, he whispered. It'll take you. It always takes what it chooses. I shook my head. It doesn't take, I managed to say, my voice hoarse. It marks. He pulled back, staring at me. What do you mean? I looked at the water, now calm, the glow gone as if it had never been. It doesn't want to kill me. It wants me to carry it, to remember, to witness. Allan's face darkened. That's the price. Back at his cabin, he wrapped me in blankets, made me drink hot tea. But nothing could warm me. The cold was inside me now, deep and permanent. I told him what I had seen. The faces, my own reflection, the voices calling my name. He listened in silence, his jaw tight, his hands clenched. Finally, he said, It's begun. What has? The binding, he said. Once it shows you yourself, you belong to it. You're not just an observer anymore. You're part of it. I wanted to deny it, but I couldn't. The truth was already inside me, as undeniable as the storm. That night I dreamed again. I was standing at the shore, the ledger in my hands. The blank page glowed faintly, the stains spreading like ink in water. My hand moved on its own, writing words I couldn't control. The lake does not forget. The lake does not forgive. The lake waits. When I woke, the words were still in my mind, etched there like scars. And I knew Allan was right. The lake had chosen me, and the price was already being paid. Clore l'histoire avec la voix definitive declare? I write these words because I have no choice. The lake demands a witness, and I have become its voice. After the storm, after the night of faces and whispers, I tried to resist. Allan begged me to leave Evershade with him. He spoke of distant cities, of starting over, of a life where the lake could not reach us. But even as he spoke, I knew he was wrong. The lake is not bound by geography. It is not a place you can escape. It lives inside you once it has chosen you. I told him this, and he looked at me with something like pity. Or fear. Perhaps both. The days that followed blurred together. The town seemed quieter than ever, though I could feel its eyes on me. Doors closed when I passed. Conversation stopped. Even the children, usually reckless in their curiosity, avoided me. I was no longer Claire Whitmore, librarian, daughter, neighbor. I was something else now. Something marked. At night, the dreams grew stronger. I would see the ledger open before me, the blank page glowing faintly. My hand would move across it, writing words I did not understand. Sometimes they were warnings. Sometimes they were commands. Always they were not my own. When I woke, the smell of algae clung to me, and my hands were damp as though I had been writing underwater. One evening, Allan came to me, his face drawn, his eyes shadowed. "You're slipping away," he said. "I'm becoming what I was meant to be," I replied. He shook his head. "No one is meant for this. It destroys everyone it touches." "Then why are you still here?" I asked. He had no answer. That night, I returned to the lake alone. The water was calm, the surface smooth as glass. The moon hung low, casting a pale light that shimmered across the ripples. I stood at the shore waiting, and then I heard it. Not a whisper this time, but a chorus. Voices layered upon voices, rising from the depths. They spoke not only my name, but words I could not comprehend, syllables that felt older than language itself. I fell to my knees, the sound filling me, overwhelming me. It was not frightening anymore. It was inevitable. The lake was not asking for my life. It was asking for my memory, my voice, my witness. I don't know how long I stayed there. When I finally rose, the world felt different. The air was heavier, the trees darker, the town more distant. I was no longer separate from the lake. I was part of it. When I returned home, I opened the ledger. The blank page was no longer blank. Words had appeared, written in my own hand, though I had not touched a pen. The lake does not forget. The lake does not forgive. The lake waits. Allan came to me the next morning. He saw the ledger, saw the words, and his face crumpled. "It's done," he whispered. "Yes," I said. "It's done." He begged me again to leave, but I only shook my head. "You can run, Allan." "But I can't. I am the witness now." He looked at me for a long time, then turned away. I don't know if I will ever see him again. And so I write this not as a plea, not as a confession, but as a warning. The lake does not kill. It marks. It binds. It waits. It has chosen me, as it has chosen others before me, and as it will choose again. If you ever come to Evershade, if you ever walk the path through the pines and stand at the shore, you will feel it too. The pull, the silence, the weight of its gaze. And if you listen closely, you will hear what I heard. Your name, whispered from the water. Subscribe for more videos.